This is a CBC News special presentation.
My name is Albert Ernest Richardson. I served in the Army.
Marcel Lemay. I served in the Navy from 1954 to 1969.
My name is Stanley Stewart. I served in the RCAF.
My name is Paul Paolini. I served with the Royal Canadian Signal Corps.
My name's Ron Moyes. I joined up when I was 17, 1943. Altogether, I did 46 years of service. I'm still walking around.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row.
That mark our place, and in the sky,
The lark still bravely singing flies, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow.
Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders field.
take up our quarrel with the foe.
To you from failing hands we throw.
The torch be yours to hold it high.
If ye break faith with us who die,
We shall not sleep, though poppies grow.
In Flanders fields.
In Flanders field.
in Flanders fields.
In Flanders fields.
In Flanders fields.
You were looking at some of the crowds there gathering here in the nation's capital, in Ottawa, around the National War Memorial. It is a fairly balmy day in Ottawa today, 13, 14 degrees, a far cry from what it is usually like in a November day in Ottawa. So we expect that to be reflected there in the faces you're seeing gathering to honor people who have served. Also, I should say, the first Remembrance Day where there are no COVID restrictions at all. So we are expecting large crowds to gather right there where we are around the National War Memorial on this, the 11th day of the 11th month. And of course, at the 11th hour, we will take a moment to remember those who have served, who continue to serve, and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Good morning to you. I am Rosemary Barton here to be with you for our special National Day of Remembrance here in the nation's capital. Of course, many of you taking a moment of silence and a moment to reflect on this day across the country in different cities and towns and in many different ways. We want to, of course, thank some of those veterans you saw in the opening video. They're all veterans at the Pearly Health here in Ottawa, reciting in Flanders Fields and talking a little bit about who they are and what they've done. And we'll hear a little bit more from some of them about the ways that they have contributed and served this country through their lifetime. But we do appreciate them doing that. It was very moving to see them all reciting that famous poem in Flanders Fields. Just a couple of housekeeping notes as we get underway for the ceremony. The American Sign Language interpretation, if you need that, is available for this ceremony today. It is streaming on CBCNews.ca, on CBC Gem, and on the CBC News app. Lots of ways, of course, to watch us through the day, and there'll be lots of people here to help us with our coverage, to talk to some of the people gathering, the crowds and the veterans, and of course, Hannah Thibodeau is one of those people. One of Hannah's very favorite days, I know, because she gets to talk to some people who have become familiar faces and even friends of hers and ours as we reflect on this day. Hannah, good to see you this morning.
Thank you, Rosemary. And usually I end with Second World War veterans, but today I'm going to begin with one. I am joined by Arthur Webster. Mr. Webster, tell us about your service. And you were very young when you joined.
I had joined at 16, at the Hamilton Trade School, where my father was in charge of the administrative wing. And he and another sergeant major swore me in at half pay, which was 65 cents per diem. A lot of money back then.
A lot of money back then.
Well, I was 16. Yes.
That was a young age to join.
I wanted to join. I have two brothers in, as I told you. Yeah. And my dad and my pal and I, we both joined together. Victor, whom we'd gone to school together for 10 years. So we knew each other very well. And fortunately, ended up in the same regiment.
Were you ever scared? You went to a lot of different locations.
Yes, I had. But I was too young to be frightened, I suppose. I suppose I was scared on occasion, but I don't recall.
You don't recall because you're
really
too young?
Don't. Too young, supposedly. And I was actually doing some helpful work to the regiment.
What does it mean to be here today for you?
I come here often, and it's a great day. Look at the people that have come here. These people have never forgotten. A lot of them naturally are relatives of their soldiers, airmen, Navy. So I think this is why, and everybody like myself remembers the 11th of November.
When you have that moment of silence today, what goes through your mind?
My two brothers, my father, my parents, they've all gone, including my Mrs. Webster, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, that was recent.
It's certainly, 4 months ago, actually, the 28th of this month. However, I'm getting along. Everybody loses their partner eventually. I was hoping me first, but no, it wasn't.
But you're still pretty young.
Well, 97 and a half. That's not too young. But I'm versatile. I can still hang around, do things.
What's your message to this crowd here today?
Well,
I see you looking at them too.
Indeed, because there is quite a crowd here. And as I said before, most of them, I would think, are relatives, uncles, aunts, father. Oh, not fathers, they'd be all gone by now. However, it's a great turnout, as you can see. And there's not all Ottawa people. Quite a few people from various parts of Ontario, like myself from Toronto, and a young Arthur who comes from Whitehorse.
That's your son.
To be with me and to help me. He's been a helpmate for years.
Well, they're here to pay tribute to you and all others who served.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to do that.
Well, thank you for your service.
A pleasure. All right?
That's it.
Good show.
Good show.
Cut that off, I hope.
No. Rosie, one of my favorite days, and to start with Arthur Webster is just a thrill.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Hannah, and thank you to Mr. Webster as well. Of course, Second World War veterans, an average age of about 96 or 97 and a half for Mr. Webster, somewhere between, broad estimates, 15 to 20,000 veterans from the Second World War remain. Again, there is a large number of people here. You might remember 3 years ago, you weren't allowed to have anyone here because of COVID, which led to a particularly somber Remembrance Day. Last year, a few people filtered back, probably a few hundred around the memorial. Today, though, an impressive turnout because there are no restrictions, and as I said, the weather is good, so that's nice to see. Some things returning to normal, particularly on an important day like this. And this is a good moment right now to remember why we're here today, and here's why. That is good to remember, not only where Canadians have served through the years, but also how many Canadians have made the ultimate sacrifice, how many we have lost, and to help us think about what this day is about and those people who have served, and to remember our history, we're going to welcome Andrew Birch. He's the Canadian War Museum's post-1945 historian. Nice to see you this morning, Mr. Birch.
Thanks for having me, Rose.
Appreciate you doing this. What do you think about on Remembrance Day as a historian, someone who knows more than the rest of us probably about what this day brings?
Well, when I'm looking at the crowds here, I'm just reflecting on the fact that this represents a a bright line linking the first Remembrance Day, Armistice Day in 1919, right through to the present. And the faces and the conflicts that were represented in the people that assembled on the 11th day of the 11th month to observe that armistice are perpetuating a memory of a watershed event in world history, which is the end of the First World War, creating a generation of veterans unlike any that had been seen in Canada, and then continued and inherited that legacy through the Second World War, through the Cold War, the Korean War, through the multiple peacekeeping missions and training missions abroad, through the Afghanistan War, and then through the multiple security operations and others that are being observed around the world today. And I think about all of the people in that crowd who are going to have stories, personal stories and connections to history that they're living today and they're observing today. And it's really a privilege to be here and to be able to see that act of remembrance enacted this year, 103 years since the first one.
And nice to see large numbers, that this is not something that people forget. It's something people want to do and want to turn up and take a moment. Andrew Birch, we'll come back to you. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to go to Hannah Thibodeau. She is with the Chief of the Defence Staff now. Hannah, back to you.
Hi, thank you, Rosie. Yes, I'm joined by the Chief of Defence Staff, General Wayne Eyre. I want to thank you for your time today. I want to start off first by asking, about something that's happening globally right now when it comes to Ukraine. And it seems like when it is Russia seems to be pulling back a bit. Just tell me your thoughts on this as a general.
So firstly, Hannah, it's good to see you in person.
Yes, you as well.
We've got to watch Ukraine very, very closely. We've been expecting this withdrawal for some time. It is by no means the end of the conflict. This could go on for quite some time. But it just speaks to the increasing danger, the increasing threat in the international security environment, something that we in Canada need to be very, very concerned about.
When it comes to, we know about recruitment is very difficult right now for the Canadian Armed Forces. How do you change that?
So we're facing the same challenge that every other industry in the country is facing, with the workforce challenge, with the shortage of labor. So we have to make a value proposition as to why it's important to serve our country, especially in these times when our democracy is increasingly under threat. Our national prosperity is under threat. Let's face it, our national prosperity is underpinned by stability in the international order. And so we need to collectively, with our friends, partners, and allies, deter aggression that seeks to upend that order, which will cause so much harm here at home. That's a reason to serve. That's a reason to join our military, to be part of something bigger.
Let me ask you about the Queen. This will be the first Remembrance Day ceremony where the Queen has passed. She also served. She was a veteran. What does that mean to Canadian veterans and also women in the military?
So the Queen was a very, very special person who served by example, the selfless service to the Commonwealth, putting all else aside to ensure that she set that fantastic example for everyone in the armed forces. Very, very inspirational.
I just want to ask you before I let you go, what today means for you.
So today is a tremendously emotional day as I reflect on those that we've lost over the course of my service, friends, subordinates, colleagues, everywhere from 1993 in Croatia through to Afghanistan. But it's also personal as I think of my family members who were killed in the Second World War, in the First World War. And so it's a deeply personal day, but it's also a day to reflect on the values that our veterans and those that sacrificed so much that they embraced, and how we need to continue to embrace those values of defending our democracy, which is increasingly under threat.
And just one tidbit you told me before the interview, you are the first person to serve in your family after your parents or grandparents?
Well, my great uncle was killed in World War II. He served with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was killed in April of 1943. And so I was the first member, am the first member to serve since then. So it brought up some emotions.
Okay, I want to thank you for your time today and nice meeting you in person.
Very nice to meet you.
General Wayne Eyre, thank you for your time. Rosie.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks to General Arrow, of course. As the crowds continue to gather here until the official ceremony begins, where, of course, there will be wreaths laid and tributes paid, and we will talk more about that as it gets underway. But a good time here to remind you, I'm at that tent there at the back of your screen, but it's a good time to remind you of where we are, of course, in the center of Ottawa, not far from Parliament Hill, gathered around the War Memorial, which was first unveiled in 1939. Here's a little bit more about what it means and how it began. In 1939, King George VI officially unveiled the memorial, originally built to mark Canada's sacrifice in the First World War.
Without freedom, there can be no enduring peace, and without peace, no enduring freedom.
Peace and freedom, those values symbolized by two bronze figures sitting atop the granite arch. Marching through the archway, 22 sculptures representing the Canadians who have answered the call to serve. And directly in front lies the tomb of the unknown soldier, a poignant reminder of the 116,000 men and women who fought and died for their country. Over the years, the memorial has been rededicated to honor all Canadians who have served in times of war. The Boer War, the Second World War, the Korean War of the 1950s, and the decade-long mission in Afghanistan. I will talk more about the war in Afghanistan because this year's Silver Cross Mother was chosen because her son was a veteran of the Afghanistan war, so we'll talk more about that as things get underway. But as you can see, just about 30 minutes or so, not even, 15 minutes or so from the beginning of the official ceremony. Let's go down to David Thurton. He is in the crowds talking to people about why they're here and why they've come, and they are turning out in some big numbers today, David, so over to you.
Hey, Rosie, it's good to be with you. It's good to be with Canadians. I have to say that the crowds were back last year, and they are back even more this year. You could take a look. You could see that, we're on Elgin Street right now. It's about 10, maybe 12, 15 people deep in some places. And I just wanted to introduce you to one person who is in the crowd right now, Sergeant Titus Alulu. Welcome to Ottawa. He's from Pond Inlet. He's a Canadian Ranger. You're no stranger to Remembrance Day ceremonies here in the nation's capital, but you usually celebrate it, or mark it, in Pond Inlet.
Yes.
Just tell us about how ceremonies compare to, compared to how we mark it here in the nation's capital.
This is very different from what we do up in the Arctic during the ceremony. It's normally they're very small. This one is huge, like it's national. We march and then we go into a place and then celebrate in the community hall or church.
And of course, it's much colder. The winter starts a bit earlier up in the Arctic. I don't think a lot of Canadians probably realize how much work the Canadian Rangers do in protecting, Canada's north. What do you want Canadians to know about the work that the Rangers do?
We are in the areas. I'm talking about my area. There's Canadian Rangers in every province, in the northern part of provinces. But in the high Arctic, we patrol the part of the Northwest Passage. Our job is to see and report to our headquarters. Anything that we see that is out of ordinary ships, other vessels and airplanes, that sort of thing. We also monitor ships in summertime along with the Canadian Armed Forces.
Absolutely. And you also help the Canadian Forces by doing a lot of cold weather training, helping them, learn how to survive on ice, you were telling me, for a number of days without any type of, shelter. So that's pretty awesome. So they do a lot of work in, protecting Canada's north and also making sure that the forces can survive in cold weather climates. Rosie.
David. That's a wonderful guest to get on today because we don't talk probably enough about the Rangers and what they offer to our country, in particular in the North. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. You can see that the Veterans Parade has started to happen around the memorial here as we wait for dignitaries to arrive shortly. That won't be too long. This is where my job gets a little challenging because it's quite loud when you're here in person. You know, a lot of provinces keep kids in school on this day, even though it is a federal holiday. And the reason they keep kids in school is to have a moment for students to learn about what Remembrance Day is and mark this day as well and take this as a moment to remember. And Deanna Sumanek-Johnson is in Oakville with us in a school where some kids are doing just that today. Deanna, good to see you.
Good, nice to see you as well, Rosie. At this school, Garth Webb Secondary School in Oakville, you could say that they commemorate Remembrance Day throughout the year. I mean, look at these letters behind me. Look at the poppies that they have on that glass window. The school is named after a Juno Beach veteran, and they're in very close contact with the Juno Beach Center. The letters are a special project they're doing right now for Remembrance Day, and they're basically created their augmented version of real war records. They contain some real telegraphs, some of them sadly telegraphs announcing the passing of a soldier, the death of a soldier to their families. But students did real historical research and made these large letters that remember some of the lives lost in Canada's wars. And of course, one of the major parts of teaching history and one of the challenges is keeping it interesting and relevant to students. And I think when I interview students, a lot of the times they say, well, I don't see myself reflected in history. I don't think history is about people like me. This is where Mr. Ian Duncan, who teaches history here at Garth Webb Secondary School, comes in. Tell me, Ian, about your teaching philosophy, about teaching these underrepresented histories.
We really like to tell the stories of as many people as possible from Canada's history. Canada's a diverse nation today, and so we're working to tell those diverse stories in the past as well. At a time like Remembrance Day, in a school named for a veteran, we're recognizing not just the stories of those who are traditionally thought about at Remembrance Day, but so many others, Black Canadian communities, Indigenous treaty partners who fought alongside our soldiers in the wars, Chinese Canadian soldiers, LGBTQ soldiers as well, are all part of the work that we do, and we empower our students as storytellers so that they can also move forward with that knowledge of what happened in the past and sharing what they've learned with others.
Absolutely, and here we have one of Mr. Duncan's students. Leah Patel is joining me, and Leah, you have a picture of a young soldier here. In fact, you and I were just remarking just how young he looks. Tell me, who are we looking at?
This is Clarence Alvin Trim. He's a Black Canadian soldier who was a private in the Navy. He was a part of the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, and he was a normal, everyday person, just like anyone who could have went to war. He really valued his family, and especially his sister. He said if anything happened to him, if he got injured or hurt, that he would want his best friend to take care of her if he ever passed away. And so what happened when he died at 21 was his best friend married her, and yeah.
What a wonderful story. I could really hear in your answer the attachment, Rosie, I bet you could as well, that Leah, who's 15 years old, thoroughly modern girl, feels to this soldier that she researched. And that's where Remembrance Day is such a wonderful opportunity to really make history real and relevant to young people living today. Rosie.
Yeah, Deanna Sumanek-Johnson, love that. I love being able to find a personal connection and connect with one soldier. That's a great way to do it. Thank you so much, Deanna. We will come back to you. Another way to think about Remembrance Day is to mark important moments that have happened during conflicts, and there are a lot of them, sadly. This year, it has been the 80th. It has been 80 years, rather, since the Dieppe raid, the Dieppe attack. It was this nation's bloodiest day in the Second World War. There's lots to talk about in terms of whether it was the right thing to do at the right time. We'll get into that with our historian here. But the French town marked that anniversary back in August because it was a momentous day perhaps for all the wrong reasons, 80 years ago. Here's the CBC's Katie Nicholson.
We are honored today to have with us Mr. Gordon Fennell, veteran of the Dieppe Raid.
The last time Gordon Fennell was in Dieppe, he barely made it out alive.
They shall grow not old, that we that are left grow old.
80 years later, no longer surrounded by the enemy, but by adoration, awarded France's highest honor and the Medal of the City of Dieppe.
I would like also to remark how pleased I was personally to see that all the growth taking place in that terrible day.
It was the horrors of that morning which kept him from returning.
I remember chiefly it was pandemonium. I felt that I'd had quite enough on the day of the event, and I wasn't anxious to get back.
There may be few who survived this raid still alive, but even after 80 years, their legacy is finding ways to live on.
And you might notice, although you can't see it in this shot right now, there is a special flag in front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier called the Dieppe flag. It's got a remarkable story of being passed from a German soldier to an American soldier, and has finally now made its way back to Canada. It's called the Red Ensign flag. It was a symbol of our young country before we had our own national flag. And you'll just watch for it there. It's in a frame in front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Also an important piece of history that has returned to Canada and returned to the Canadian Legion. But I want to bring in Andrew Birch about the Dieppe raid, because it's 80 years ago, and still, I would say to this day, there are different opinions on how necessary it was, whether it was the right thing to do, whether the sacrifice was worth what came next. You want to weigh in on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the raid had a variety of objectives. The objective was to not to invade France at that time, but of course just to seize the town of Dieppe, to destroy fortifications, and to harass the German defenders of the coastline, to gather intelligence from a variety of different sources. And about 5,000 Canadians took part in that raid, about 1,000 British commandos. There were aircraft from 69 squadrons, 250 naval vessels. So it was tanks coming ashore. So it was a very large-scale raid. Almost everything that could go wrong went wrong. Yeah. It was a disaster in terms of human loss, in terms of the military objectives. Having been to the beaches there myself, it's flanked on both sides by high chalk cliffs, as you saw in the video segment there. And so any soldier, no matter how experienced, would have been hard set to get off that beach, even without losing the advantage of surprise, as took place in the morning. The Germans were prepared, they were ready, and the Canadians fought hard. They weren't able to obtain the objectives over the course of the 9-hour raid, and were forced to leave the beach, and only about 2,100 or so of those Canadians who went over managed to make it back. 916 were killed that day, or died of wounds, or in captivity later. About 2,000 were taken prisoner, and it was a great boon to Germany as a propaganda coup. So there was almost immediate questions about the raid. It's you can only imagine the scale of that loss on a single day today, and what the ramifications would be. And so there was debate at the time and since, historically, about was this the right thing to do? Were there lessons learned that were valuable, that helped later on? But the thing that's worth bearing in mind is to take Dieppe in its moment and where it was in the course of the war. 1942 was a terrible time for the Allies. There was setbacks in the Pacific, there were setbacks in the Atlantic where U-boats were prowling. There was all sorts of setbacks in the Eastern Front where the Hitler's forces had invaded the Soviet Union. And of course, Fortress Europe was being ever more fortified. So I think that while the academic debate over whether it was the right thing to do at the right time, whether there were lessons learned, at the end of the day, you have to cope with the fact that there were nearly 2,000 families who had to cope with the knowledge that either their children were not coming home, or they were guests of the Third Reich for the remainder of the war. So it's a terrible, tragic day, and it's one of the reasons we remember it so well.
Yeah.
Every year we mark it, and the cemetery at Dieppe is a very devastating place to visit because you see the ages of those who fell.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we do have a duty to remember, but we also remember that in war, there's not just victories and it's not just glory. There's terrible tragedies and terrible sacrifice that we observe every year.
And there are those, again, not to get into the academic conversation that you would know much more about, but there are those that believe that it was the reason that the D-Day invasion was so successful because, as you say, you learn lessons in war, as tragic as they are.
I think if there was a single, to get into the debate a little bit, if there was just Dieppe and then D-Day, that may have been true, but there were a number of landings that took place in Sicily and in Italy and in operations in North Africa and elsewhere. And so we had a great many opportunities to learn, but there's not a direct line in the evidence between Dieppe and D-Day.
Right. Here are the veterans beginning their march. This is always a pretty moving moment, Andrew, because you get to see the people here that we are here to honor as they arrive around the National War Memorial. Okay, just a powerful image there of veterans marching up and around the National War Memorial, and even more powerful because we haven't seen it in a while, to be honest, because of the pandemic. So lovely to see those faces and see the applause that they are getting on the streets here in Ottawa. One of the wars, of course, that is being honored here today is the Korean War, sometimes seen and viewed as the forgotten war, something that is being talked about more and more in this country. And just earlier, before we got going, I spoke to Albert Richardson, a veteran of the Korean War, who told me a little bit about what he's thinking about on this day. Albert Richardson, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here, Mrs. Barton.
So I know, Mr. Richardson, that your family has a long military history, and I wonder what you think about on Remembrance Day.
On Remembrance Day, I feel that a lot of sacrifices had to be made in order to obtain a nice place to live in. As my father was in the First World War, I had two brothers in the Second World War. One was a POW in Germany. I was in Korea. My young brother was in Germany. And our daughter was working at Haiti after the earthquake in 2010.
That's a lot of service from one family.
From 1914, yes, we all volunteered. That's another thing I remember on Remembrance Day. They seem to forget the men that went to Korea. Over 500 did not come back. They were volunteers.
And you too were a volunteer, Mr. Richardson, and a Korean War vet. What do you think about when you think about your time there? Does it still bring you pride that you served this country?
Oh yes, oh yeah, so much so. The Korean people really respected our volunteerism and going over there, and some giving of the supreme sacrifice. And they never forgotten, over 70 years now. And we still have functions with the Korean embassy here in Ottawa, and Christmas, summer, we're always together, a great commodity. And the Korean people are very gracious people. Yeah. We really do respect them, and they respect us, as our graves are well kept over there in Tucson.
Yeah. I know Remembrance Day can sometimes be emotional for you.
Yeah, for me, yes. Having so many volunteer for my family, that my dad never talked of the war, the Great War. My brother said something short about it as being a POW. Yeah. But they didn't talk about war at home. Or actually, we don't even have a gun at home. That's what gun I'm talking about. My dad didn't like guns. He was a machine gunner in the World War I.
But you think about your family and your friends on a day like this.
Oh yes, yes. Yeah. Yes, we had a few friends across the road that shot down. They were tail gunners in the Air Force, Second World War. And we know they were young. Another set of volunteers. But it had to be done. Somebody had to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mr. Richardson, I do appreciate you talking with us today and reminding us of all those people who volunteered to serve, like yourself. And I thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your service, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Barton. Right, bye for now.
Thank you, sir. And we're looking there at some faces of veterans who have gathered here for Remembrance Day, for this ceremony. We are going to start to see the arrival of the dignitaries, the Governor General, and others. We should point out that the Prime Minister will not be in attendance this year. He has a series of summits that he had to leave for last night. Both APEC, the G20, 4 countries over 10 days. But when he stopped on a refueling moment in Alaska to refuel the official plane, he was able to get out of the plane and then briefly greet military members, people who are flying that plane that he's on, the crew, and pay tribute to them while on the ground in Alaska on that refueling mission. He also did a ceremony in New Brunswick before leaving. But the Prime Minister will be represented officially today by the Minister of Veterans Affairs, Lawrence Macaulay. The Prime Minister's wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, will also be in attendance. And of course, the Governor General, who is the Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, will be here with her husband today. And the other person who you won't know, or you may not know, but you're going to get to know now, is the Silver Cross Mother. Every Remembrance Day, the Royal Canadian Legion names a Silver Cross Mother, chosen to represent all Canadian mothers and, as we've gone on, parents who've lost a child in military service in the country. And this year it is Candy Greff. I traveled out to Alberta last week to talk to her about how she remembers her son, Byron Greff. And importantly, Byron Greff was the last of 158 Canadian soldiers killed in the war in Afghanistan. Master Corporal Byron Greff. Here is his mother, Candy.
This year, we also...
158 is an important number, but I want to think of the 157th and the 156th and the 1st, and all of them are so important, and have loving families who miss them dearly, just like we do every single day.
I just want to start by trying to get to know Byron a little bit.
Oh,
what kind of son was he? What kind of kid was he?
He was a mischievous little fella and stayed that way. However, if there was a chore to be done, mow the lawn, for instance, heavens, that was a focused, very focused young man in anything that he needed to do. He wanted to do a good job at it.
What was that like, that first time saying goodbye to him, knowing that in that instance, it was a combat mission, it was dangerous?
Yes. Sleepless nights, worry, pretty much 24/7 worry. And I knew they trained him well. And I knew that he would listen to absolutely every order that he was given, and they would keep him safe. And they did, and he came back safe and sound.
And then the next mission was different because at the time it was a training mission. So was there a sense that it was less dangerous? Because that's certainly what I remember I said, other people said.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could breathe a little easier. You could sleep more at night, not being so afraid. I knew the Taliban were still there, but with it being non-combat, it was easier to realize that he was there. Yeah. And he was training, he would do PT with the ANA, he said, the Afghan National Army. That's not dangerous.
Here's that the suicide bomber with somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 kilograms of explosives, the Taliban say, was targeting that
was
bus.
Especially deadly, killing at least 17 people, including Master Corporal Byron Greff of Edmonton.
Why? Why him? Why that particular bus? The suicide bomber's the only one who could answer that. That was the one he chose and brushed up against. And that's when the bomb detonated.
When you lay that wreath in Ottawa, tell me what will be going through your mind, what will you be thinking?
I'll be thinking of Byron, watching down. And hopefully standing right beside me. That's what I hope for. Sorry. Get emotional. And it's a heavy, heavy load on a person's shoulders. And I think all Silver Cross mothers and families know that. But you stand up taller because of the weight.
Well, he sounds like a special person.
Oh, he really was. Yeah. He was. Thank you for being so gracious.
Yeah.
You really are.
And to you, really. Thank you.
Veterans Affairs, Mr. Paul Ledwell.
That was Candy Greff, the Silver Cross mother, the National Silver Cross mother this year, honoring her son, Byron Greff, the last Canadian soldier killed in Afghanistan. Just a lovely family, I have to say, and just a lovely woman to sit down and talk to. Byron Greff also left behind a wife and two children, including a small baby who had been born just before he was killed in Afghanistan, all those years ago. We are just waiting for the dignitaries to arrive, and that's what you hear there, the MC talking about, and the people who will be representing the government and others as the official ceremony gets underway. And maybe I'll just bring you in here, Andrew Birch, as we wait for those dignitaries to get here. Afghanistan, I feel like it's more palpable even now because we see what's happening in Afghanistan and sort of the things that those people, Byron Greff amongst them, fought for, and the slip backwards because of the Taliban. And I did talk to Candy Greff about that too, and that saddens her, but it didn't make her feel as though what her son had done was in vain or was lost.
Yeah, I think that everyone who served in Afghanistan will have a different view on that. There's certainly no comfort to be found in what's happened in Afghanistan. It's a terrible thing that's happened to the people of Afghanistan, for whom Canadians really were going and fighting in the same way that in Korea we were fighting for people in South Korea and hoping for a better future.
Yeah.
And there may be yet hope. I hold out hope for that, certainly. But it's a great weight for all the families to carry, to know that their loved ones has fought and served, and certainly for veterans who see them, so painful to see the slide back. But I think they can also point to a great deal of accomplishments while they were there in providing the government of Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan, some space to breathe and develop in the time that they were there. There was no going to be solving all the problems of Afghanistan while the Canadians were serving there, and certainly when we left in 2014, the future was very uncertain. But I think people were hopeful, and maybe I'm certainly hopeful for a brighter future there. In the fullness of time, but it's a dreadful thing for Canadian veterans and the families of veterans to look at and see, and a lot of soul searching that we've seen, both the Silver Cross Mother and through a number of the veterans I've talked to. But I don't think there's just one way to look at it.
But there's obviously an attachment to Afghanistan still for this country, and trying to reconcile what happened with what this country tried to do.
And with as with other conflicts in the past, a lot of connections between veterans about what they experienced jointly, and keeping that memory of what they did together alive.
Yeah. And here we are, some of the dignitaries beginning to arrive again. The Prime Minister is on his way to an international summit. We should say that international summits, particularly APEC, are often held around this time of year. So it does happen on occasion that Prime Ministers have to miss these kinds of ceremonies. But there are people who are stepping in for him today, including that man, the Minister of Veterans Affairs, Lawrence Macaulay, representing the government and laying the wreath on behalf of the government. There's Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. She is there. She usually comes with her husband. Today she's accompanied by her eldest child. That's Xavier. He's now probably taller than his dad, I've got to say. But he's there filling in on behalf of their family today. We're also awaiting, of course, the Governor General, who we know will be today, as the Commander-in-Chief, wearing a military uniform. I believe she's wearing the Army uniform today. She does have a choice of what uniform she wants to wear as Commander-in-Chief. Last year, she wore the Air Force uniform, and this year she's chosen the Army uniform.
The National Silver Cross mother, Mrs. Candy Greff, is arriving with her husband, Greg. Mrs. Greff of Lacombe, Alberta, is the mother of the late Master Corporal Byron Greff. Byron was a member of the 3rd Battalion of the PPCLI based in Edmonton, Alberta. He was a highly skilled soldier and also trained as a paratrooper. He died on October 29, 2011, while serving in Afghanistan. He was riding in an armored vehicle when it was struck by a suicide bomber in a car filled with explosives. Byron was the last Canadian soldier to give his life in Afghanistan in the line of duty. Mesdames et Messieurs, la mère nationale de la Croix d'Argent, Madame Candy Greff, fait son entrée avec son mari Greg. Madame Greff de Lacombe, Alberta, est la mère du caporal-chef Byron Greff. Byron était membre du 3e bataillon du PPCLI basé à Edmonton, Alberta. Il était un soldat hautement qualifié, ayant également reçu une formation de parachutiste. Il est décédé le 29 octobre 2011 alors qu'il servait en Afghanistan. Il se trouvait à bord d'un véhicule blindé lorsque celui-ci a été frappé par un kamikaze dans une auto remplie d'explosifs. Byron a été le dernier soldat canadien à avoir donné sa vie en Afghanistan dans l'exercice de ses fonctions.
And there's Candy Greff arriving on the red carpet, the Silver Cross Mother, to a warm round of applause from the crowd, which is lovely to see. A fairly big crowd here today. It's actually getting warmer as the morning goes on, which is quite a change from what we are used to here in Ottawa in November. You see most people not even wearing jackets.
Arriving now is Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, Governor-General of Canada. Mesdames et Messieurs, Son Excellence, la très honorable Mary Simon, Gouverneur Général du Canada.
There, the Governor General and her husband, Whit Fraser, the Governor General, Mary Simon, wearing, as we said, the uniform of the Canadian Army. We should tell you there's a couple of things that will take place during this ceremony in tribute to the Queen, because, of course, she also served in the British military as a young woman when she was just 19 years old. And so there'll be a moment to recognize her and to fly past to pay tribute to her. And, of course, for the first time in 70 years, we will hear the song God Save the King and not God Save the Queen. There's the Governor General speaking to the Silver Cross Mother and making her way down the line of dignitaries before the ceremony gets underway. A couple of other things to watch for as the ceremony unfolds. That Dieppe flag that you're going to see in the frame in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier, a piece of history that's been returned to the Royal Canadian Legion, and there in part to mark 80 years since the Dieppe raid, which was another important part and one of the bloodiest day for this country in the Second World War. We're going to let this ceremony unfold and let you also enjoy it and take some time to reflect as it unfolds, including the moment of silence, of course, the 21-gun salute, O Canada, and all the pieces you would expect in a ceremony of this kind. Just a lovely day here in Ottawa with really, I would say at this stage, thousands of people turned out for the first time in so many years because of pandemic restrictions. We'll come back to you on the other side of the ceremony to bring you more voices of people in the crowd and veterans, and some other interviews of people who are serving right now, too. So more of that when the ceremony concludes.
Ladies and gentlemen, O Canada, with members of the Central Band of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Ottawa Children's Choir. Mesdames et Messieurs, O Canada, avec des membres de la musique centrale des Forces armées canadiennes et du chœur des enfants d'Ottawa.
shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ils ne vieilliront pas comme nous qui leur avons
They shall not
survécu.
grow old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Apu nida chika chishe niwit miam china e kwano chechi inuya apu ki nishtua pagu kama miche monandi pietu te makani ne te nika miam te pishkaniti no kwanito wa tuashkwa kona Nanitam nika chisituana. Nanitam chika chisituana.
Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
In respecting belief and conscience, I invite you to take this moment for reflection. Aujourd'hui, nous rendons hommage
Today,
aux hommes
we
et aux
pay
femmes de
tribute
toutes les
to
générations
the men and women of all
qui ont consenti à
generations
servir notre
who
pays,
agreed to
et à
serve
ceux
our
et celles
country,
qui poursuivent encore
and
cette
to all of those who continue that mission. Every
Chaque
sacrifice,
sacrifice est inscrit dans le
every
ciment
sacrifice
qui façonne
is
l'avenir de
engraved
notre pays.
in the cement of this
Et
country
ainsi ne peut être oublié.
and must never be forgotten. Consequently, as Canada gathers today, may we all be inspired and full of admiration for all of those who gave us so much.
This year in particular, we remember the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Raid and Operation Jubilee. So too, we remember the service of those whose contribution have only now been recognized by Hall, the number 2 Construction Battalion. Aussi, c'est avec une profonde
Also,
gratitude
it is with
que nous nous souvenons
profound
de nos
gratitude that we
anciens
remember our veterans
et de nos militaires toujours en
and
service.
our military
souffrent de
personnel
blessures
still in
physiques
service
ou
who
psychologiques.
have psychological or physical wounds.
Trouver la guérison
May they
et la paix.
find peace and healing.
We are forever grateful for the families who have supported and suffered along with service members. They are a source of strength and care that is indispensable and invaluable. We ask for strength for the leaders of the world and for those of our country, for our sovereign, Charles II, King of Canada, who continues to mourn the loss of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. For the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and the Chief of the Defense Staff. May they guide us with wisdom during times of both war and peace. In a world fraught with struggle and instability, where war continues to rage in Ukraine, we gather to affirm with one another our determination to remove the barriers of division in a spirit of reconciliation. We seek dialogue with one another in all spheres, social, political, and religious, that in doing so, we may achieve a lasting peace. May we all strive to continue our efforts to build a better world, lest we forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice-Regal Party will now begin placing their wreaths. Mesdames et messieurs, le cortège vice-royal déposera maintenant leur couronne.
And this is the part of the ceremony where different diplomatic corps and veterans groups come and place a wreath at the base of the war memorial to represent different communities and groups and regions. And you'll see by the end of this, the memorial will be surrounded in groupings of wreaths. But did want to call attention to one wreath in particular that was already placed there in memory of Queen Elizabeth II, because of course she too was a veteran when she was 19 years old, and a princess still at that point. She served in the British military as a mechanic, and that was part of her legacy too. And that is an important moment that the Legion, that the veterans want to highlight today, given that she has passed away after 70 years on the throne. Another part of the way that they plan to honor her today is this vintage fly past, which is going to be pretty cool to watch when that happens, which will be just in a number of moments after the wreath laying. And that's when we will also hear God Save the King for the first time at a Remembrance Day ceremony in this country in 70 years. So another moment to mark as we watch the faces of veterans and the crowd who've turned out in impressive numbers today to honor Canadians who have served and continue to serve. So a little bit more of the ceremony still yet to come as we watch people lay wreaths and take a moment to reflect.
at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, when the guns of the First World War at last fell silent, a universal reckoning was in order. What had happened? What had we sacrificed? And most importantly, for what purpose? Année après année, à la 11e heure du 11e jour du 11e mois.
On the 11th day of the 11th month, we gathered to reflect at this solemn time to try to answer these questions.
The answer is as simple as it is painful. The very best and bravest of our nation, the most courageous of our sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, partners, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers. These heroic souls stood on guard, sacrificing their lives, their bodies, their minds, every last bit of who they were. Nous savons ce que nous avons perdu.
We know what we lost. We know what was sacrificed. But to what end?
At its very essence is for freedom. Freedom, an ideal which to this day is being fought for by brave men and women in too many parts of the world. An ideal that is, to our great despair, becoming harder and harder to take for granted. In the words of military veteran Charles M. Province, it is the soldier, not the minister, who has given us freedom of religion. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier, not the campus organizer, who has given us freedom to demonstrate. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protester the freedom to burn the flag. We live in a country where we are able to take this cherished ideal for granted because of those who understood that life without freedom for their country, for their loved ones, for their neighbors, for people they don't even know, is worth fighting for at all costs. So today, on this National Day of Reckoning, we first and foremost say thank you. And every day forward, we must say thank you again and again. For it is in giving thanks that we recognize our national responsibility and our commitment to fulfilling it. In April 1917 in northern France, Canadian soldiers, they stormed through sleet, mud, and fire to capture Vimy Ridge. As Prime Minister Trudeau once described it, they came from coast to coast, Francophones, Anglophones, New Canadians, Black Canadians, and Indigenous peoples, and battled for 4 days to achieve this decisive victory. As a great veteran of that storied battle shares, we went up the ridge as Albertans and Nova Scotians. We came down as Canadians. The story of that battle is the story of each and every one of us. Our cherished soldiers and their families, they are on the front lines. But every one of us must do our part, for we are all in this together. We are all one. We share this responsibility to preserve the sacred ideal of freedom. And focus on this responsibility today as we express our commitment to our beloved soldiers and their families, not by simply saying thank you, not by simply supporting our veterans and their families through words, but rather through action, with our time, with our attention, and with our resources. There are so many ways to do so many organizations through which we can fulfill our commitment. Our sacred commitment to support the physical and mental health of our veterans and their families as they return from the front lines. That is how we share our gratitude. That is how we sincerely and clearly declare we as Canadians are united, standing in solidarity with the brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces who have led and continue to lead the way forward. We affirm that just as you, our cherished soldiers, have made a lifetime commitment to each and every one of us so that we can live, love, and breathe freedom, so too do we make a lifetime commitment to you and to your families. May God keep you safe in mind, body, and spirit, now and far into the future. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, God Save the King with the Ottawa Children's Choir. Mesdames et messieurs, que Dieu protège le roi avec le chœur des enfants d'Ottawa.
Remembrance Day Parade, Walmart Path, in column of route, veterans leading, move to the right, in column of route, right, turn.
Party facing north, left and right, turn. Yellow party, 3, 4, and 2 columns, left and right, clear bridge, start.
Thank you for your attendance at the National Remembrance Day ceremony. Today, as a grateful nation, we stand in collective remembrance of all who have fallen in the military service of Canada. May we never forget. Please stay in position while the Vice-Regal Party departs. Merci d'être parmi nous à l'occasion de la cérémonie nationale du Jour du Souvenir. Aujourd'hui est l'occasion où notre nation reconnaissante exprime à l'unisson le souvenir de ceux et celles qui sont morts au service de notre pays. N'oublions jamais. Veuillez rester en place avant la sortie incroyable. Finally, each evening over the past 2 weeks during this year's National Hockey Campaign, the Royal Canadian Legion Committee Command has been honored and sent its virtual hockey drop. It can be seen at the backdrop of the Keith Tower on Parliament Hill and on the Senate building. There will be a physical presentation this evening from 6:30 p.m. to midnight. The hockey drop is also displayed outside the Diplomatic Corps
All right, the official ceremony has ended here at the National War Memorial. The Governor General there meeting with members of the Diplomatic Corps and other VIPs seeing their way out. Hopefully you got a little glimpse of the special fly past, although it wasn't quite as close as I would have hoped. There was a Hawker Hurricane and a Spitfire up there to honor the Queen, but they didn't really fly past as much as you would have hoped. So now what will happen is veterans will again parade out and around the War Memorial and depart and be applauded again by the people, the large crowds that have turned out for this moment. And maybe here I'll bring in our friend Andrew to tell me what you thought of the ceremony and whether there's anything that struck you there.
Well, it's always striking to see the assembled crowds, the official party, the number of community associations and veterans associations laying wreaths and carrying the torch for all the people that they represent and remember. Just a tremendous event. Lots of people in attendance, and again, a really fantastic opportunity to remember with so many in our community.
There is Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. She is, of course, the wife of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is overseas right now, so he sent his son, Xavier, his eldest son, I guess, to accompany his wife for this ceremony. And the clapping you hear there is because the veterans are leaving the National War Memorial. They are parading out now. That is the Silver Cross Mother, Candy Graff, meeting with people on her way out.
Wonderful.
Just it's all the diplomatic. Greg Peters.
We'll go down into the crowd shortly and try and talk to more people who have shown up today and more veterans, just as the VIPs depart, the dignitaries depart. Before the ceremony started, Andrew, we were talking about sort of the average age of veterans, including Korean War veterans who are also getting older. And that is also something, yes, we have modern day veterans, as you would call them, but from previous larger conflicts, it's difficult to think about them aging and passing away. And
yeah, I mean, we've passed the 70th anniversary of a number of key engagements in Korea this year. And so the people who were, 18, 19 at that time are now coming to almost to their 90s.
Yeah.
And of the 30,000 or so served up to the armistice and a little bit afterwards, there's only about 3,000 to 5,000 left. And so it's a very it's always a pleasure to see them, and they, having spoken to a number of them, love to come to events like this and other ceremonies because they feel that it's time to pass the torch to that next generation of veterans and youth, which they see before them today. And in this parade, you see a whole variety of experience from the Cold War through to contemporary operations. So just really not just one moment in time being remembered today, but many.
The Veterans Parade past the Governor General there in her role as Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces and dressed today in the uniform of the Army. She's She's standing there on the podium beside the Silver Cross Mother, Candy Greff, who gets the honor of standing with the Commander-in-Chief for this moment. Lots of applause in the background there as the veterans leave and the various musical formations also leave, the soldiers performing. But David Thurton is down in the crowd. The best turnout certainly in the past 3 years, David, really thousands of people out. The nice weather doesn't hurt either, but tell me who you're with and why they came out today.
Yeah, Rosie, everyone has a story here, and when they bring a picture and we see them in the crowd, that's usually a clue and a trigger for us to come up to them and speak with them. And I have someone who's here with me, Deborah Jones, who has a picture of her dad, her father, who recently passed away. Tell me about him. Tell me, what do you want Canadians to know about your dad?
Served in the Royal Canadian Navy. And he also was in a family who served. His father served, his uncle served and lost his life in World War II. And his brother served and he served. They were from Nova Scotia near Cornwallis, where there was a Navy base, and that's where he trained. Then he went to England, and my father served in the Korea War. And yes, I'm just here.
He served Canadians really well. And you were telling me that unfortunately he passed away a month to this day. And you're from Calgary. Your dad lived in Ottawa. And so you're here to pay tribute to him one last time, to say your one last goodbye.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes, it's a very emotional day for me. And I have a lot of pride for him and for all these people who are serving our country here today and all across Canada. I just thank them from the bottom of my heart. Yes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. Okay. So yeah, Rosie, I mean, this just one story in a crowd of thousands who've come out here today, you know, to pay their respects, to honor the sacrifices of so many men and women who served this country.
Yeah, that's lovely, David. Thank you. And also, it fits in with what we were talking about up here, which is how, you know, veterans are getting older, those who served in the Korean War as well. And so important to remember them when we can. Thanks for that, David Thurton in the crowd. We'll come back to you. I believe, though, that Hannah Thibodeau, who's down talking to veterans, has one for us right now. Hannah, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Of course, my favorite part of Remembrance Day is talking with the veterans. And today I'm speaking with John Geen. Right here, that's when he was 11. And today, how young are you?
Well, I'm getting the old age pension. I'm 93.
And you're getting the old age pension. Okay. So tell me why it was important for you to be here today. You have an interesting story. It was about your dad serving in World War I.
That's correct. My father mobilized in Kingston with the 21st Battalion, which was one of the famous battalions in the First World War, like the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment is among the many great Canadian regiments that we have, but I'm here not representing them today because I'm in no official capacity, but honoring them for their past. They were a regiment that was presented with more battle honors than any other regiment in the Second World War.
Wow. So today, when you were here at the memorial, what were you thinking about? And I always find that moment of silence very reflective.
Well, it was a moment of quiet for me. That's basically what it is. But what it gives me confidence that we are standing behind our military, which is so very important to do today with the things that we have going in this world. I'm a firm believer in the fact that we can resolve matters in this world so that we don't have people in Ukraine fighting, and we don't have them in Hong Kong fighting, and we don't have these things. If we just get together and attack these situations, if we all moved in on the Ukraine, we could quiet that down and get rid of that, and then we could move on to the next one. The first thing you know, we'll be talking about world peace.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
That would be lovely.
What are you feeling in your heart right now as you see all these people off to the side and people clapping for the veterans?
I'm awestruck and so grateful that they've taken the time to come out, and the enthusiasm in which they've partaken of everything that's everybody here is just so enthusiastic, whether they have a uniform on or whether they have a nice looking girl on their shoulder here.
Oh, who was that, John?
Hannah, I believe.
Wow, Rosie, it took my second interview to get to the flirting with John.
That's only because my son tries to keep restraining me.
Well, you behave yourself. I'm so thankful to have had a chance to speak with you.
Well, I'm grateful to have met you, and to think that you were at one stage of the game the sister to Tebow, the football player.
He wanted to talk football with me, Rosie. I said that'll be for another time.
Yeah, you did refer to in your interview to that blue iris.
Oh, yes,
Yep.
right up here.
That we talked about.
Yes, I want to show you that, Rosie, if you can see this. Now tell us quickly about that.
Well, this is honoring the July 1st, 1916 battle at Beaumont Hamel in the First World War, and it was a Newfoundland regiment that was almost obliterated. They lost 70% of their men in a half an hour's battle. This is their tribute, as is the poppy to you and I today, the blue iris, and I wear it with great pride. I've been to the site. I've met with and talked to the people there. They're terribly proud of that particular happening, and that they do honor to it continually.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your stories, and we honor you and your father and all those who served.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Rosie, back to you.
All right, Hannah, you just watch out for him. That's a lot of flirting for November Day. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
He wants to know what's going on.
I'm enjoying him. Tell him I'm enjoying him.
Yeah, he is. Rosemary, who's hosting this,
yes,
she said she's enjoying it. Your interview.
Well,
do you want to say hi to Rosie?
Hi, Rosie. Oh, Rosie said, yes, okay.
You know okay. Right?
Do I?
You do?
I see her on TV. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, hello, Rosie. You've got a nice staff.
Oh, well, hello. Yes, they're not my staff,
Bye-bye.
but they do very well. They do very well for my team. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Okay,
That
you're
was lovely.
welcome.
Thanks. Oh, yeah. You always have some of these nice moments during Remembrance Day. So what's happening now is they are starting to remove some of the security gates around the War Memorial, and so you will start to see my favorite moment of Remembrance Day, and a lot of people too, where people take their poppy off and place it on the tomb of the unknown soldier, so that by the end of the evening, when the sun goes down and you're no longer supposed to wear your poppy, that tomb of the unknown soldier will be covered in poppies, and it's quite a beautiful sight.
Sure is.
At the end of the day when you see it. Do you want to talk about Beaumont Hamel, just because that came up, and I didn't know there was a particular flower to signify it as well?
Well, in truth, that's something I'm not as familiar with in terms of the iris, but the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel taking place during the Somme, one of the most terrible battles of the First World War, and claiming so many lives, and very much kept alive in the memory of the Newfoundland Regiment. I know that they are in St. John's looking at bringing an unknown soldier to St. John's at the cenotaph there. Right. So it is the Newfoundland Regiment has a long and storied history, and one of those is of course of tragedy at Beaumont-Hamel. So a lot of families, a lot of communities that were forever changed, forever touched by that conflict. And as we saw with that gentleman, bringing still at that age, carrying that memory forward. Also, his comment about peace and the 2 minutes of silence. I mean, that was really what the 2 minutes of silence was originally about when it was first decreed in 1919 by King George V at that time. And it was to perpetuate the memory of that great deliverance of the armistice and of those who laid down their lives to achieve it. And so it was. That moment is to remember the fallen, but also to rejoice in that peace was with us in that day.
Well, I wanted to come back to what he said there, because he mentioned obviously the current conflict that's dominating the news cycle, and that of course is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which started back in February of this year. Of course, we're not on the ground there, but we are supporting from other places. We have trained Ukrainian soldiers. We are certainly supporting in terms of military equipment and aid, as well as taking in Ukrainian refugees. Absolutely. It is gone on much longer, I think, than many people suspected, and it is perhaps a pivotal and perhaps frightening moment for the world, as we don't really know how this ends. Although there was some news today that the Russian troops have been backed out of Kherson. But tell me, when there are things like that happening, conflicts that we are involved in through NATO, how does that, do you think, change the way we think about this day?
Well, it's.
I should just point out that Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the official opposition, is at the ceremony with his wife. Just want to take a moment to put that.
Oh, yeah. Well, when we look at what's going on in Ukraine, of course, we are reminded that war is a brutal human experience. It does terrible things to civilian infrastructure and creates a great deal of threat. And it's these sorts of threats that General Eyre mentioned earlier on in the presentation, that the Canadian military and its allies and its publics across the West have looked at and thought about how to prepare for contingencies in the futures. And we hope that Canadians are not involved in great conflicts, but we can be. We know that where Canadians are sent, especially since 2014, following the Russian annexation of Crimea or invasion of Crimea, that really set Canada on a new posture towards NATO reassurance missions in Eastern Europe, in Romania and Latvia, certainly, and of course in training troops in Ukraine. And those troops, I'm sure, will now be imparting their lessons from hard-fought lessons from fighting in Russia for their survival. So history is a funny thing, because it just keeps going. And so we see where things develop starting in 2014 in this case, and how they've escalated, and of course how Canadians are trying to keep watch on and anticipate and work with allies to manage world conflict and hopefully not see things escalate from here.
Okay, I think we're going to go back down to Hannah as people start to leave the National War Memorial. Hannah has another guest. Hannah?
Let me introduce you to Frank Reimerchuk. Frank is from Manitoba, but you signed up at the age of 17 in 1954. And tell us where you served.
And Calgary, we went to the Lord Strathcona's Horse Royal Canadians in Calgary. The recruiter thought it would be a good idea to follow my brother, who was also there. And he served the Second World War and Korea. Unfortunately, he passed on since. But I enjoyed it, every bit of it. like they told me that you can't take the boy out of the army, but you can take the army is still in the boy. The army stays in the boy.
Now, tell me, you were in Egypt, right?
Egypt for 1 year, yes. Just got married. 3 weeks later, I had to hop on the aircraft to fly over. We flew over on old North Stars. It was awful because it was so cold. Anyway, we got there, didn't know what we were going to be doing there. We were all young people. But we had a lot of good older folk leading us. That's a very, very important thing. And we were second in the regiment to go over. There was another unit that started before us. So when we went over, we have Israeli-Egypt border, and our job was to keep the peace, I suppose you'd call it. But our biggest problem was staying alive because there were minefields all over there that the Egyptians had laid, and the unit before us lost several people because they got off track and so on and so forth in the minefield. So as we got there, they got there smarter, and they put blue 45-gallon drums along the cleared path. And when it snowed sand, as I called it, every second day it seemed to blow, and the roads would get covered over. But thankfully, we'd have those blue. Looking off the distance, you could see a blue barrel, and you knew you had to go to the blue barrel and stay on the track for that. That was the biggest thing.
That was the biggest thing. But you also, as a part of the military, were here during the FLQ crisis.
Yes. As soon as we got home back from Germany after serving there, I was serving in Petawawa with the 8th Canadian Hussars then, and our unit was designated to come to Ottawa, and we had to, I guess, look after the parliamentary people that were different. Homes in particular, I looked after 2 or 3, so I was a warrant officer at the time, so I had a section of a couple of 3 Jeeps, and we would, in our spare time, just roam the streets of Ottawa. It was just wonderful. First time in my life I'd ever been to Ottawa and driving around. It was just wonderful.
What did you think of today? This is your first ceremony here in Ottawa.
It was just beyond. It was just so fabulous. Of course, the weather, we were praying hard for good weather, and we got good weather. But this was just phenomenal to see the whole thing. My wife and my daughters are behind somewhere down where they couldn't follow through fast enough. My grandson was doing the pushing. But they were watching it on parade, and they said, "Oh, there she is right here."
Oh, we're going to bring your wife in as well. She's off to the side.
She made it here.
She made it in as well. Thank you for your service.
We sure appreciate the service here. It was phenomenal. And getting to meet John, he was
John before our guest.
yeah, he was fantastic. The stories he talked, much like myself. Doing maintenance on a tank was just the worst thing that I ever did in my life. A Centurion tank, it weighs 54 tons, and I weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. And we had to clean the gun barrel with about, well, I guess 10 lengths of a stick that long, and a bunch of us had to pull the gun every time we fired it. We had to pull it, and then we hadn't fired, and the sergeant says, "We got to do it again." I said, "What? We got to do it again. Clean it." And you know, they look up, the same as they did our rifles, see if it was shining.
Well, I love hearing these stories, as do Canadians, and it's so important, Rosie, that we continue to share them.
Yes,
John Reimerchuk, thank you for your time.
Yeah, Frank Gramchuk. Yes.
Frank, oh my gosh, you know what? It was because we were talking about John.
John, yeah, talking about
exactly.
John, yeah.
Sorry, Frank.
He was a wonderful man. But you know, getting back to this parade here, they have it set up. So, of course, they know what to do. It was set up beautifully.
It was.
I have never, ever, ever expected to see anything like it.
Well, I'm happy you got to see it.
And, you know, my daughter and 2 daughters came, my son came, so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, and thank you for your service, sir.
I thank you for serving.
Thank you. Rosemary.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Frank. Nice to meet you there. I'll bring in Andrew, because these are also good history lessons for Canadians watching. That's part of why we talk to veterans. What were we doing in Egypt when Frank was serving? Yeah.
Well, that was actually Canada's first traditional peacekeeping mission after the Suez Crisis in 1956, where in response to a threat to nationalize the Suez Canal, Israel and Britain and France
really
invaded.
Your history bona fides right now.
But they invaded, and this caused a great international crisis, and there needed to be a bit of an off-ramp for the invading forces and to resolve the crisis. And one of the proposals that's passed its way through the General Assembly was, of course, the idea of an impartial military force that would go in between the combatants and allow time for diplomacy to do its work. And that was called the United Nations Emergency Force. It was the brainchild of Lester Pearson, and then Secretary of State and later Prime Minister, for which he later received the Nobel Peace Prize, and which thousands of Canadians then deployed to Egypt over the course of 10 years as part of that United Nations Emergency Force. And between Israeli forces and Egyptian forces, and although it was meant to be, of course, peaceful, as Frank said, there were mines, there were a great many risks and road travel through that area, and Canada maintained an ongoing presence through there right until 1967, and again from 1974 onwards, and one of many Canadian peacekeeping missions through the Cold War and afterwards. And as he mentioned too, in between that, this standing professional armed force was not just doing peacekeeping, but also involved in deterrence operations in Germany as part of the Cold War standing. He mentioned working on the Centurion tank. That was Canada's main battle tank as part of the brigade that served in Germany from 1951 onwards until about 1993, when the kind of moved to service in the former Yugoslavia. So there's a real chain of one person's career that links a whole variety of different operations that Canada was part of.
And peacekeeping missions, which Canada has become so known for, and certainly we won't get into it now, but certainly there's conversations right now about how Canada can contribute to or potentially lead a security force down in Haiti right now. Ongoing conversations about that, although nothing decided as of yet. And I want to talk a little bit about the military, what they do domestically in a moment, because that is of ongoing concern, how much they're called on to do inside this country. But before we do that, let's go back out to Oakville, just outside of Toronto, where Deanna Sumanak-Johnson has been hanging out with some kids at a school who are themselves reflecting today. Deanna.
Absolutely, Rosie. We're here at the Garth Webb Secondary School in Oakville, Ontario, where you could say a little bit every day is Remembrance Day, in that the school bears the name of a famous veteran who fought on Juno Beach and passed away about 10 years ago. And they do a lot throughout the year to commemorate the fallen soldiers, but of course, never more than on Remembrance Day. And they have this really cool project, you can see a little bit behind me, called Lost Letters, where students got to dig through historical archives, find little bits of history. It could have been telegraphs, letters that soldiers sent home, and then augment them, make them into these big letters that contain little bits of historical archives that tell stories of individual soldiers, many of whom did not make it home. And to show you what kind of an impact this project is having on young people, I have a grade 10 student with me, Tala Al-Husseini. Thank you for joining me, Tala.
Thank you. This is my soldier, Ricardo Losa. He is a Cuban air gunner that, oh yes, he's a Cuban air gunner that immigrated to Canada in the early 1940s. He went to high school in Miami and had experience in the Cuban Navy. So when he came to Canada, it was very unusual for somebody to be let into the Royal Canadian Air Force. That's not
Not being Canadian.
Yeah, that's not white. And so his story really shows how, different he is, and it shows that not everybody fits into this single story. I have this letter from him.
Yeah, so Tala's going to read us a little bit of Ricardo's letter written in his own hand. If you want to read us a passage.
Yes. It says, "If it ever comes to the necessity of your reading of this letter, I wish you to follow the instructions set below. I asked of you as a favor, and which at the same time are my last requests."
There you go. You see that how he wanted to be remembered. These are instructions to his superiors, right? Of how he is to be remembered.
Yes. And I also find it so fitting that today the weather is a little gloomy because they needed it on D-Day. And, you know, he didn't survive.
But we have this letter from. Thank you so much. I think that we have to move on in our ceremony, but thank you, Tala, for joining us. You can really see what an impression this left on her, Rosie.
Yeah, Deanna Suminek-Johnson, just a great idea. I love this idea the school has come up with to research these individual soldiers and find connections. It's obviously worked and is resonating with the kids, so that's lovely to see. We are wrapping things up here, and so the security gates are being pulled back so that people can come. You can see that. Thousands of people will come in now and put their poppies on the tomb of the unknown soldier. I have to say, it has gotten even warmer as the morning's gone on, now about 16 degrees here in Ottawa. Very unusual for November and very welcome. David Thurton is down in the crowds, I think, as they make their way up to the National War Memorial, getting real close. Over to you, David.
Hey, Rosie. Yes, I'm with Robert Downey Jr., not the actor, but, you know, one of the veterans who has served Canada very loyally. And we're walking right now, along with the crowds behind us, to, you know, do, I think, my favorite moment of the Remembrance Day ceremonies, which is essentially laying your poppy on the wreath. I don't know if, Robert, that's your favorite moment as well.
Yes, oh yeah, certainly. I do this every year for the last 22 years since I've moved from Nova Scotia to the nation's capital.
And I mean, as we walk to the tomb of the unknown soldier where we're going to lay our poppy, you have an important story to tell about Black Canadians and the way that they've served their country in the Second and the First World War. So maybe we could start with this person this picture that you're holding.
This is a family favorite picture. This is a picture of my paternal grandfather, Private George Alexander Downey. He's a veteran of the First World War, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, affectionately known as the Black Battalion, and also the Home Guard during the Second World War.
And you have someone else with you.
Oh yes, this guy.
Maybe we could just stop because, like, you know, you have some medals there. That's a precious cargo there. I want to make sure that we don't, you know, damage them in any way.
This guy, my hero, my personal hero, my father, my namesake, Robert Downey Sr. Served for 29 years, from 57 to 85. Served it with NORAD at CFS Alert. Served with NATO over in West Germany. Also served with the UN peacekeeping in Cyprus.
So your grandfather, your father, and yourself, 3 generations.
We have another generation, a younger cousin. Shouts out to Second Lieutenant Jerome Downey in Halifax. I'm sure he's at a ceremony there. So he's the latest generation. So we have 4 generations. And in fact, even on the other side, I'm a relative of William Hall, VC, on my paternal grandmother's side.
And, you know, getting to serve as a Black Canadian in the Canadian Armed Forces hasn't always been easy. Can you just tell Canadians about this? This is probably history we don't know about.
Well, even going back to the First World War, World War, the Black Canadians were caught up in the patriotic fervor, much like Canadians across the country. They wanted to do their part for king and country, and so they rushed to the recruiting centers. And unfortunately, they are summarily told, for the most part, by COs, commanding officers across the country, that this is a white man's war, or more politely in some cases, we'll send for you when we need you. And so about 2 years into the war, when the casualties were mounting up and the British needed men to form construction battalions, to railroads, cut lumber for the trenches and so on, and build roads and whatever, a compromise was made that perhaps we could entertain and we could have a Black battalion. So breaking with tradition, where most of the units recruited locally. In this case, with the Black Battalion, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, they were given permission to recruit from across the country, and also there were Americans and people from the West Indians that came to Canada or crossed the border to fight alongside Canada.
I have to ask you this, though. You know, despite all that hardship, can you tell us why do they still want to serve?
like I say, Black Canadians are among the most patriotic of Canadians. They fought in every war that involved Canada. In fact, even before Confederation, the Black Loyalists fought on the side of the British during and remained loyal to the British during the American Revolutionary War. The Black Pioneers fought again with the British against the Americans during the War of 1812. We fought in the First World War, the Second World War, and peacekeeping up until today.
You know, thank you for that bit of history, which, you know, even myself as a Black Canadian, I wasn't really aware of. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And as we walk up to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, you know, to do this kind of moment where you're going to lay your poppy, what's going to be going through your mind?
Each year that I come, I think of all of the men. Black, white, Indigenous, gay, straight, the women. I think of everybody who served in the military. Today is a great, nice day and ever, but usually it's a blistery, cold day. And I think of those men and women during those times that would have been out there fighting on behalf for our freedom and for the benefits that we enjoy today.
Absolutely. And we'll let you go do that.
Thank you.
Rosie.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. Really nice to meet the other Robert Downey Jr., as it were. Maybe just before I go to my next piece, though, I'll bring in Andrew Birch. Just to speak to that, because it is important to recognize that the military has become more diverse, that diversity was not always welcome, that some people had to fight in order to fight.
Yeah.
And that's just one element of that.
Well, he did a terrific job in summarizing the history of like the construction battalion, which was brought about in part through community agitation to say, you know, we want to do our part and you can't restrain us from doing our part. And the kind of color barrier to service, you know, was imposed even in the interwar period and had to be overcome in the Second World War. And after that, it was after that color barrier was lifted, there was an opportunity to realize the potential of the communities across this country that Indigenous peoples and people of color generally across, even with catching up to the times in terms of allowing more women in service into different roles. The military, and I think, you know, many institutions were in many ways playing catch up to Canadian society as a whole, and we're still seeing some of the impacts of that today. But Mr. Downey Jr. did a fantastic job in summarizing the storied history of Black Canadians in uniform. And at the War Museum right now, there's actually an exhibition called A Community at War, which is a partnership with the Niagara Military Museum and the Black community around Niagara, telling stories from that community from the First World War right up to the present day.
That's good. That's a good plug you got in there, too. That was your first one, so you held off for a while.
Thank you.
Let's take a moment now to think about the First World War. It's been more than a decade since the First World War veteran died, and now, as we've been talking about, veterans, of course, from these great wars are aging, and so is the case for veterans of the Second World War. There are fewer and fewer of them. We want to spend some time now getting to know 96-year-old Ron Moyes, who wanted to share his story with Canadians. He was a tail gunner in the Second World War. Here's Ron Moyes.
My name's Ron Moyes. This year I'm 96. I joined up when I was 17, 1943. Trained as an air gunner, went overseas. We did mining trips. We found those quite dangerous. You usually just got blown out of the sky by the anti-aircraft fire, but we survived. As a tail gunner, you know, that's minus 40 degrees up there where I was. There was no heat in the aircraft or anywhere. We flew all the time, and you have 200, 300 aircraft on a raid at nighttime. You have to watch it, because you have no communication between aircraft, no lights, and you get that many aircraft all going, say, through cloud. It gets dangerous then.
How do you feel people calling you a hero?
Not a hero. When I joined up, I wanted excitement, and I got it.
That's Ron Moyes talking to us about his contribution in the Second World War. Those are pictures there of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, where people, we were just talking about, has become a tradition, maybe a more recent tradition, where people lay their poppies at the end of the ceremony. And by night, that tomb is just actually a blanket of red poppies as a symbol that the day is ended and that they have taken a moment to reflect. One of the other events that happened this year was in relation to Juno Beach, which was, of course, a historic site of the D-Day landing, such an important part of Canadian history and where so many Canadian soldiers fought and died. And there was a plan by a real estate developer to try and build condominiums on Juno Beach, which was very upsetting for many veterans and many Canadians who believe that this is a historic spot that needed to be preserved. And so they started a fight against the real estate developer to stop this. And last month, the federal government agreed to pitch in $4 million in order to help buy that land, save it from development, and make sure that it would remain a place that would exist in tribute to those who fought and died on Juno Beach, so many of them Canadian. And so to talk about that, we're going to talk about one of the people who was one of the first waves of Canadians to land at Juno Beach, who was very much against this idea of condos at Juno Beach. Jim Parks is 96 years old, and he joins me from Toronto. Mr. Parks, nice to meet 98 years old. Excuse me, Jim Parks. I made you younger than you are. Mr. Parks, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
How are you doing today, sir, on this Remembrance Day?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's good. I want to start by asking about Juno Beach, Mr. Parks, and why this was so important to you to save this piece of land and history from being developed.
Well, it's one of the major battles they had during the World War II, like the liberation of Europe, the landing on the beach, and was very instrumental in leading to the eventual defeat of the German army. And it's very important. It's a major battle site, similar to what you'd call Vimy in World War I, because it was instrumental in opening up the area to allow more forces to go into free Northwest Europe.
What is your memory of that day, Mr. Parks, of landing on Juno Beach? What do you remember of that day?
Oh, I remember our boat was hit going in, and I ended up, we had to abandon the boat because they dropped off our carriers, our mortar carriers, and it sank. And so we were told to stay on the carriers, but as the carrier sank, we just hit for the shore, started swimming for shore. So we lost everything going in. We had nothing left to go in. And when I did get in, I passed. We passed some of the infantry companies that landed ahead of us about a minute or two, and I passed this one Corporal Scaife who'd been mortally wounded, and I picked up his Sten gun and a small pack, and that's the equipment I had, because we'd lost everything before we even hit the beach when that our carrier sank in the water. Having to swim in. The water was pretty rough too, you know. You get close to shore, the water gets rougher.
That's incredible. That's incredible, Mr. Parks. What do you remember what you were feeling when that was happening? Were you frightened? Were you worried?
What I felt like?
Yeah, were you frightened when you were thrown into the water with no weapons and taken to the beach? Yeah.
We were very anxious going in, and you're very concerned, and it's there is a certain amount of it's built-in fright. It's there all the time. You're always the survival.
That's right.
You're just hoping that nothing's going to hit you, and you're going to get through to the beach and get up to that sand dune. That's what you wanted to do.
The fact that so many Canadians lost their lives and you survived, how do you reflect on that today?
Well, I think I was one of the lucky ones when I think about it, because our particular unit, we lost 159 killed right on the beach itself, we had 400 landed on the assault group, and about 4 companies, and including us, and we lost 159 out of that 400, and out of the group that was left, I was one of the lucky ones. So
yeah.
I made it through to the sand dune. I had to wait for the. We lost our carriers, you know. We were supposed to have the mortar carriers.
Yeah.
And so we had to wait. We waited there, knowing that the remainder of our platoon would come in, and they did come in about a short while later.
And Mr. Parks, were you relieved when Ottawa made this agreement to buy the land, to protect the land in tribute to you and what so many of your colleagues and friends and veterans did there?
I think that was a good move. I didn't realize how bad it was, but when you look at that area, that's one of the major vacation spots for the Normans and the rest of France.
Yeah.
And they protected, by buying that, they protected that land. That's sacred land, you know.
Yes.
For the developers, they're going to build a road and whatever else they're going to put in there, and it would have encroached on a major part of the battle for Normandy right there.
Yep. Jim Parks, what an honor to talk with you and for you to share some of your experience with me. I feel very privileged to meet you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It'd be nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too. And thank you for your service, Mr. Parks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you so much. That's Jim Parks, who was there on Juno Beach. It's kind of incredible that you get to talk to these people who did these incredible things, incredible moments in Canadian history. But there are, of course, still Canadians serving in various places across the world and around the world, about 2,000 or so on missions abroad. And as we were talking about, Andrew and I, one of the important things that Canada is doing now, Operation Reassurance, supporting NATO in Central and Eastern Europe. And so let's go and talk to someone who is currently serving. Major Caleb Gray is the Chief of Staff of the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group Latvia, and he is in Camp Adigi in Latvia at this hour. There's a 7-hour time difference, so Major Gray, thank you for doing this for us today. I appreciate it, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. And I just have to say, I'm listening in on the headphones here, and it's very humbling to be following Mr. Parks in an interview. I'll say that.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I completely agree. What are you thinking about? What are you reflecting on today, Major Gray, as you're serving in Latvia on this Remembrance Day?
So earlier today, we had a Remembrance Day ceremony very close to where I'm standing right now in front of the Latvian War Monument. And as for every Remembrance Day, it's a time of deep personal reflection for all soldiers, and I think most Canadians. And it's it's a time of camaraderie where we get together and exchange stories, good stories, bad stories, and we really cling to each other for support morally and otherwise.
Why is it important, do you think, for Canadians to be there as part of Operation Reassurance right now, Major?
I think it's very important. So our mission here is to act as a deterrence to any foreign aggression in Latvia. And Latvia is one of our NATO partners. And, we're here physically on the ground to act as that deterrence, but we are ready and prepared to fight if required.
What would be your message to Canadians seeing you, Major, today, on this day when we're thinking about past conflicts, but also about you and your colleagues and friends serving now? What would you like them to know?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in and paying respect to all of our fallen, and it really means a lot to the soldiers overseas who are away from their families, and as well to the families of the fallen. Like we remembered them in our prayers today on parade, and as well in our quiet reflections. And as well, there are a lot of soldiers who are not in uniform. We have the luxury, while we're still serving, to have each other to cling to, and it's very important that Canadians gather around and those soldiers that aren't in uniform and that often are carrying like a heavy cross.
Major Gray, just in 20 seconds, anyone you want to say hi to at home?
Absolutely. I just want to say hi to my wife, Jenna, and my 3 boys, Colt, Abel, and Gabriel. I love you very much, and thank you very much for being so strong.
Major Gray, what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you, sir, and thank you for your service. Stay safe. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll go back to Hannah Thibodeau now with a final thought on today. Hannah.
To a young fella here, it was very interesting what he thought. He said he was really sad when the veterans walked by. I think he was only in grade 8, I believe, but he said he was really sad when he saw the veterans walk by, thinking of what they had to go through. And then talking to the veterans too, my favorite part of every year, it's such a thrill to be able to tell their stories and share them with Canadians. Rosemary.
Hannah Thibodeau, thank you as always for your excellent coverage today on Remembrance Day. I know you'll be on News Network later today, so thank you for that. I'll just get a final thought from my special guest, Andrew Birch, Canadian war historian post-1945. This is the first time you've sat here in this place and watched it from this way. Just a thought about today for you.
Well, it's certainly a different view than normally when I'm here at the Cenotaph as part of the crowd. Yeah. Feeling very privileged to have the opportunity to observe it from that and to offer a bit of perspective on the history. And there's been so many chapters in Canada's military history, some still being written, as we've seen from Major Gray in Latvia and all of his colleagues. And I feel very privileged to be able to share with the public here and at the museum about the many amazing stories that come out of Canada's conflict, some tragic, some heroic, and all very much relatable and human, because these are the people who make history.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and lending all your knowledge to us. And Canadian War Museum is a good place to visit if people want to learn more. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you to my colleagues Hannah Thibodeau and David Thurton for all of their work, for the enormous team behind the scenes that puts all this together every year. As we know, as you know, this is an important moment for Canadians to take a moment to reflect, but also a privilege to bring this special broadcast to you. I'm Rosemary Barton. On behalf of myself and the whole team, thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Take a moment to thank someone around you who has served, and remember, thank you.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
We shall remember them.